The night my sister made me wear her old dress to the Hargrove Gallery opening, she told me it was a favor. "You should be grateful," Daphne said, zipping herself into a column of champagne silk that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked at me in the mirror, at the black wrap dress 2 sizes too big, at the safety pin I'd used to cinch the waist, and smiled the way people smile at stray dogs. Kind enough to notice. Not kind enough to care. At least you'll be in the room. That was Daphne's gift to me. Being in the room. The Hargrove Gallery sat on the corner of 5th and Meridian, the kind of building that made you feel poor just by looking at it. All glass and pale limestone, and a door that a man in white gloves held open without making eye contact with anyone he didn't recognize. He made eye contact with Daphne. He looked through me like I was weather. Inside, the air smelled like cold money. Lilies and something woodsy, cedar maybe, and underneath it all the faint copper tang of old wealth trying to stay relevant. The room was full of people who had mastered the art of standing in expensive shoes without wincing. I had not mastered this. My heels were Daphne's too, half a size small, and every step I took felt like a quiet punishment. I found a corner near the east wall and stayed there. That was the plan. Daphne's actual event planner, a woman named Tori, with a headset and dead eyes, had made it clear. Daphne's gallery opening, Daphne's night, Daphne's contacts. I was the backup, the filler. The person you seat at the edge of the table so the numbers work out even. My name is Pell. No, wait. That's not right. I've been called so many things in this family. My name is Sable Merritt. 26 years old. Associate bookkeeper at a firm that handles mid-size restaurant chains, 3 of which are currently under audit for reasons I discovered and reported and will not be thanked for. I live in a 1-bedroom in Prospect Heights. I take the B train. I pack my lunch. Daphne is 31, 5'9", and has been the beautiful one since the day I was born, and the room shifted away from our mother's exhaustion toward the new noise Daphne was making. She's never stopped making noise. I've never stopped being the thing the room shifts away from. I wasn't angry about it anymore. That's the thing people don't understand. You stop being angry and start being something quieter. Tired, maybe, or just accurate. I knew what I was in this room. I was the sister Daphne brought because our father had asked her to include me, and Daphne always gave our father exactly enough to keep him from asking twice. So I stood near the east wall and looked at the paintings. There were 32 of them, I counted. Abstracts mostly, the kind that sold for the price of a car because the artist had the right last name or had once had lunch with someone who mattered. A few landscapes, one portrait of a woman with her back turned, which I thought was either very brave or very lazy, and hadn't decided which. And then I saw the price tags. Not on the paintings themselves. Those were discreet, tucked into the corner of small white cards. What I mean is I saw the pattern. I'd been doing this long enough that numbers talk to me the way music talks to people with better ears. And the numbers here were off. Not by a lot, by exactly enough. Painting 7, listed at $48,000. The artist's last authenticated sale at auction, which I had looked up on my phone in the cab because I'd had nothing else to do, had gone for $11,200. In 18 months, that kind of appreciation didn't happen, not without a very specific kind of help. I was doing the mental math on paintings 12 through 15 when someone stepped into my peripheral vision and stopped. Not drifted, not wandered. Stopped deliberately, the way a person stops when they've decided something. I didn't look up right away. That was maybe the only smart thing I did that night. "You've been standing here for 40 minutes, the man said. His voice was low, the kind of low that didn't need to perform itself. "You haven't looked at your phone once." I looked up then. He was taller than I'd registered from the corner of my eye. Mid-40s maybe, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more interesting. A jaw that had taken a hit or two and reset wrong. Eyes that were dark and patient in the specific way of men who've learned that waiting costs less than moving. His suit was charcoal, no tie, the first 2 buttons of his shirt open. There was a scar at the base of his throat, thin and pale, the kind that came from something with an edge. He was not holding a drink. He was not smiling. He was looking at painting number 7. "I was looking at the paintings," I said. You were looking at the price cards. I should have denied it. I didn't. The margins are wrong. He turned his head, then slowly, the way you turn toward a sound you weren't expecting. His eyes moved over my face with something that wasn't attraction and wasn't dismissal. It was the same thing I'd been doing to the price cards. Assessment. Explain that, he said. It wasn't a request, exactly. It also wasn't rude. It was the tone of someone who asked questions because they expected to receive answers, and had simply never learned to dress it differently. I pointed at painting 7 without touching it. Kieran Bloss. Sold at Brennick's auction house, December before last. 11/2. Tonight that painting is listed at 48,000. I moved my hand to painting 8. Same artist, smaller canvas, listed at 51. The authentication certificate on this one, I had read it while the event planner wasn't watching, is dated 4 months before the auction, which means the certificate predates the sale, which means someone is working backward. Silence. He looked at the painting, then at the card, then at me again. Working backward, he repeated. Manufacturing provenance after the fact. The sale price at Brennick's is real. The authentication is real, but the timeline doesn't match, and the markup doesn't match market behavior for this artist in this period. And if I had access to the gallery's acquisition records, I could tell you exactly where the money is going. I stopped. I was aware, suddenly, of how much I had just said, and to whom I had said it, and that I had no idea who this man was. Daphne materialized at my elbow. I hadn't heard her coming, which meant she'd been nearby for longer than was comfortable. Sable. She said my name like it was a spill she was blotting, controlled, apologetic to no one in particular. I'm so sorry. She does this at parties. She gets a little. She touched my arm, which was her way of moving me. You know how it is. She's very numbers-brained. It's actually a little. She laughed. It was the laugh she used when she wanted men to find her charming and her sister harmless. The man looked at her. Daphne was, objectively, beautiful. She had the kind of face that galleries put on invitations. She was wearing champagne silk and her hair was done, and she smelled like something French, and she was smiling the exact smile that had opened every door in her life since she was 19. He looked at her for approximately 2 seconds. Then he looked back at me. The acquisition records, he said. What would you need to access them? Daphne's laugh stopped. About 4 hours and a decent spreadsheet program, I said, and someone with authority to open the files. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. He held it out to me, not to Daphne, who was standing 6 inches closer, and waited until I took it. The card was thick, matte black with a single name embossed in grey. Callum Voss. Nothing else, no title, no number, no company. Monday, he said. 9 a.m., and then he walked away, and every person within 10 feet shifted slightly to let him pass, the way a room shifts around something it doesn't want to acknowledge that it's afraid of. Daphne stared at the card in my hand. What? She said, and it wasn't a question. I didn't sleep that Sunday night. I spent most of it at my kitchen table with my laptop and 3 different browser tabs and a cup of tea that went cold somewhere around 2 a.m. I had typed Callum Voss into a search engine and gotten exactly 4 results, which was itself a kind of answer. Regular rich people had more than 4 results. Regular rich people had LinkedIn profiles and charity galas and their name in the caption of photographs. Callum Voss had a mention in a 2019 federal court document that was mostly redacted, a single line in a Forbes article about private investment holding companies, where his name appeared in a list without context, a brief note in a Brooklyn real estate filing from 2021, and a photograph, one photograph, clearly taken without his knowledge, from the background of someone else's event coverage in 2022. In the photograph he was standing in a doorway, half-turned, looking at something outside the frame. He looked the same as he had at the gallery, like a man who had learned that stillness was a kind of power. I knew what the word meant when it was attached to a man like that, with those 4 search results, with a card that had no phone number. I knew, and I went anyway, because the acquisition records had been wrong, and someone had made them wrong on purpose. And I had been doing honest work in dishonest buildings my entire career, and I was tired. in the bone-deep specific way of someone who has been accurate for years without being thanked for it. The address on the card, which I'd found by calling the one number I could locate, a building directory line that connected me to a woman who said nothing but the address, was a floor in a building on West 44th. No signage. A single elevator that required a key card. A lobby that looked like a law office and felt like something else. There was a man at the desk who looked at me without expression and said, "Merritt, not a question." "Yes," I said. "16th floor." Heaston slid a temporary key card across the desk. The office on 16 was not what I'd expected, which I suppose meant I had expected something. Floor-to-ceiling windows, which was predictable. A long table with a laptop already open and a file box at one end, which was not. 3 men who left when I walked in, which I was pretending not to notice. A chair pulled back from the table at one end, and at the other end, Callum Voss, standing with his back to me, looking out at the city like it owed him an explanation. "You're on time," he said without turning around. "I said I'd be here." He turned. He was in a dark sweater today, the sleeves pushed up, and I could see the edge of a tattoo at his left forearm. Numbers, I thought, though I couldn't read them. There were faint shadows under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept either, except where my sleeplessness came from anxiety. His looked like a habit he'd made peace with a long time ago. "The Hargrove Gallery," he said. "I have an interest in 4 of the pieces on display this weekend, a financial interest." He paused, an interest that has begun to concern me, because the provenance documentation is inconsistent. Because I paid $230,000 across those 4 pieces based on a valuation report I'm now questioning. I sat down at the table, because I was going to be here a while, and my feet were already reminding me that I hadn't worn comfortable shoes. "Do you have the valuation report?" He slid a folder across the table. It landed in front of me with the precise placement of someone who had judged the distance correctly. I opened it. He sat down at the other end of the table and was quiet, which was, I was learning, something he was exceptionally good at. For the next 2 hours I moved through the documents and said very little, and he said nothing at all. Someone brought coffee at some point. I didn't look up to see who. The file box contained acquisition records, 3 years of gallery purchase logs, 2 different authentication certificates for the same painting with different dates, and a set of wire transfer records that were trying very hard to look like routine gallery expenses, and were not. At 11:15, I put down my pen. "You were defrauded," I said, "not just by the gallery. The authentication firm, Prescott Valuation Group, there's a shared signatory on 3 of the forged certificates. Same initials, different stamps. Someone inside Prescott was generating documentation on request." I turned the relevant page toward him. "The money is routing through a shell company registered in Delaware, Harfield Creative LLC. Formed 8 months ago, 2 directors. One of them is the gallery's managing partner." Voss looked at the page. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A shift, small and cold, like a thermostat dropping. "The other director," he said. I had been hoping he wouldn't ask, because the answer was the part that had kept me up, that had made my hand slow down when I found it, that had made me sit very still for a long moment before I'd been able to keep going. "The other director of Harfield Creative LLC," I said, "is a Daphne Elise Merritt." The room was very quiet. Voss looked at me. I had no idea what he was thinking, and I was good at reading people through numbers, and he didn't have a number on him that I could decipher. "She's my sister," I said, because it seemed necessary to say it, and also because I realized, not surprised. I had not been surprised when I found it. I had been something else, something heavy and resigned, the way you feel when a thing you suspected for a long time turns out to be true. "I know who she is," Voss said. He said it quietly, and it landed like something cold. "She brought you to the gallery," he said. "She brings me to events when our father asks her to. It's a courtesy. She doesn't usually expect me to." I stopped. She didn't expect me to look at the price cards. Voss was quiet for a long moment. He had his hands flat on the table, which I was learning was how he sat when he was thinking hard about something he hadn't decided yet. "You found this in 2 hours," he said. "The documents weren't as clean as whoever put them together, thought they were. I picked up the wire transfer records. There are 3 different account formatting styles in here, which means 3 different people entered data at different times and didn't standardize. When you don't standardize, you leave edges. I set the papers down. I'm good at finding edges. I can see that. He stood up, crossed to the window again, which seemed to be his version of pacing. Your sister, he said with his back to me, has exposed me to a significant legal and financial complication. She did it deliberately, with forethought, using your family's credibility with gallery management. Your father sits on the Cultural Foundation Board, which gave Daphne access she shouldn't have had. He paused. I do not like being exposed. I waited. I also, he said, now have $230,000 in fraudulently documented assets and a paper trail that connects my name to a shell company I didn't know existed until 40 minutes ago. Harfield Creative is new enough that your investment predates it, I said. The fraud was executed after you purchased. You're not a participant, you're a victim. That's recoverable, legally, if the documentation is preserved correctly. He turned from the window. You speak very precisely for someone whose sister just committed wire fraud against me. I speak precisely, I said, because that's the only thing in this conversation I can control. Something happened in his face. It wasn't quite a smile. It was more like recognition, the way you recognize a type of stone you've seen before in a different place. How long have you been doing this work? He said. 7 years. 4 at the firm. 3 before that at a smaller practice that got absorbed. And you're still at associate level. It wasn't a question. He'd figured out the answer already. I answered anyway. I report things, I said. It makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people tend to not promote the person who made them feel that way. Yes, he said, they do. He came back to the table, sat down, this time not at the far end but closer, 2 chairs away, and put the valuation report in front of him and looked at it for a long moment. I need someone to audit the full gallery portfolio, he said, every acquisition in the last 4 years. I need it done quickly, quietly, and without anyone knowing who commissioned it. He looked up. I also need someone to dismantle Harfield Creative LLC in a way that protects my investment from any secondary litigation. That's forensic accounting work, I said. I'm not certified in forensic. I'm not looking for a certification, he said. I'm looking for the person who found this in 2 hours. I looked at the file box, at the papers spread across the table, at the wire transfer records with their 3 different formatting styles that nobody else had noticed. What about Daphne? I said. Voss was quiet for a moment. Your sister, he said, made a very deliberate choice. She had access to my portfolio schedule. That's a limited list of people. She created a company, documented fraudulent provenance, and routed my money through an LLC she controls. He picked up the authentication certificate with the 2 different stamps. She also brought you to the gallery opening, which is interesting. She didn't know I'd look at the price cards, no. He set the paper down, but she knows what you do, and she chose to bring you anyway. I hadn't thought of it that way. I turned it over, the way you turn a number over when it doesn't add up the way you expect. Maybe she thought I wouldn't say anything, I said. Maybe she thought that's what I always do. Is it? I looked at him. Not this time, I said. Something settled in the room, not comfort. It wasn't that. More like an agreement reached without paperwork. I'll need full access to the gallery's digital archive, I said, and the Prescott Valuation Group's client records from the last 18 months, which will require either a legal instrument or someone with enough leverage to make the request without one. I paused. I assume you fall into the second category. I do, he said. I'll also need you to understand that what I find may be worse than what I've already found, and that when it is, I'll tell you. Even if it's inconvenient. He looked at me for a long moment. That's not a disadvantage, he said. That's the only thing I'm paying for. He named a number then, a daily rate, for the duration of the audit. I had been a bookkeeper for 7 years, and I had never heard someone say a number like that in the context of my work, and I was extremely careful not to show anything on my face. One condition, I said. He waited. When the audit is complete and the documentation is in order, Whatever happens to Daphne, the company, the gallery, I want a written record that I cooperated fully with the disclosure process. Under my name, my full name. I folded my hands on the table. I'm tired of accurate work disappearing into other people's files. Voss was quiet. Then he said, "Agreed." He extended his hand across the table. I shook it. His grip was firm and brief and his palm was warm, and when I let go I was careful to look at the papers instead of at him. "Monday through Friday," I said. "I'll need to maintain my hours at the firm until the retainer clears. I'm not burning a bridge on a handshake." "Reasonable," he said. "I'll start with the acquisition logs from the last 18 months and work backward, cross-referencing against public auction records and—" I stopped because he was almost smiling. Not quite. The corner of his mouth just slightly. "What? Nothing," he said. "You work the same way I do. I doubt that. You find the edges," he said, "and you follow them." He stood to leave, his meeting, his room, his building, and I stayed seated and pulled the acquisition logs toward me, and he paused in the doorway. "Merritt," he said. I looked up. "The dress," he said. "The one from the gallery." I blinked. "The pin at the back," he said almost gently. It was holding the waist in. He said it without cruelty and without pity, and that somehow was worse and better than either. "My sister's," I said. "I know," he said. And then he was gone, and I was alone with the file box and the evidence of my sister's careful betrayal, and outside the windows of the 16th floor, the city went about its business as though none of this had happened. I pulled the first folder toward me. I had a lot of edges to find. I found them, all of them. It took 11 days, 14 hours of work I couldn't put on my timesheet at the firm. 2 arguments with a records manager at Prescott Valuation, who changed his mind after a single phone call from a number I didn't recognize. And one night, Thursday of the 2nd week, when I found the 3rd shell company, the one nested inside Harfield Creative like a tooth inside a tooth, and sat in my kitchen at midnight and understood fully that my sister hadn't been careless. She'd been counting on me to be. The 3rd company was called Merritt Consulting Group, and it was registered in my name, not Daphne's name. Mine. My name, my address from 4 years ago, my social security number from a form I'd filled out for a family tax filing that Daphne had offered to file on my behalf because she said she was doing hers anyway, and it was easier. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Voss. It was past midnight and I didn't think about that until the phone rang. He picked up on the 2nd ring. "Merritt," he said. He didn't sound like I'd woken him. "She used my name," I said. "There's a 3rd entity, Merritt Consulting Group. She registered it with my information. Every payment that cleared through Harfield Creative, the final routing was through my name." Silence. "Are you somewhere safe?" he said. The question was so unexpected that I didn't answer for a moment. "I'm at home," I said. "I'm fine. Yes. Don't touch the 3rd file," he said. "Don't move the documents. I'm sending someone to your address in 30 minutes. They'll take everything and store it under chain of custody protocols. Your name, your account, will be protected." "How?" "Because I can document that Merritt Consulting Group was created without your knowledge, using fraudulently obtained personal information, and that the individual who provided your personal information was acting without your authorization." He paused. "Because you called me the moment you found it. 11 days of documented cooperation. Merritt, this isn't a trap. This is a paper trail, and paper trails can be rewritten." "Not rewritten," I said. Corrected, he said. "Yes." 30 minutes later, a man I'd never seen before knocked at my door, showed me an ID that told me nothing useful, collected the printed documents in a sealed case, signed a receipt with my name and his initials and the date, and left. I stood in my doorway for a while after. Then I got my coat. It was cold out and I didn't care. The gallery was closed when Voss had his conversation with Hargrove Management the following week. I wasn't there for it. I had no desire to be. I was told about it afterward, in clinical summary, the way Voss told me most things. Efficiently, without drama, as though the things that happened in his world were simply weather conditions to be managed. The managing partner of the Hargrove Gallery resigned. Prescott Valuation Group's principals were contacted by someone representing significant financial interests, and 2 of them chose to cooperate with disclosure rather than face the alternative. The alternative was not specified to me, and I did not ask. Daphne was called in to speak with a man who was not a lawyer and not a law enforcement officer, and whose function I understood only in general terms. What was said in that room, I don't know. What I know is that Daphne called me from a number I didn't recognize 3 days later, and when I picked up she was quiet for a long moment and then she said, "You could have let it go." "No," I said, "I couldn't." Another silence. "You've never been able to let anything go," she said, and her voice had the same quality it had always had. That cool, specifically calibrated disappointment she'd been handing me since we were children, the one designed to make me feel that my accuracy was a defect. "That's correct," I said. I hung up. It was the first time I'd hung up on my sister, and it felt like setting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten the weight was optional. The audit was formally complete on a Friday. Voss had asked me to come to the 16th floor to sign the final disclosure documents. My name, my full name, as agreed, attached to every page of the findings. The disclosure packet was going to 3 separate recipients. His attorneys, a federal oversight body with jurisdiction over art fraud, and a private archive. I signed and everything. My handwriting was steady, which surprised me. When I was done, Voss looked at the stack of papers for a moment, and then at me. "I'm having the written record prepared," he said. "Your name, your cooperation, your findings. It'll be formally filed Monday." "Thank you," I said. "It's what we agreed to." "I know. I'm thanking you anyway." He looked at me the way he'd looked at painting 7 that first night, with that careful, interested attention that didn't rush itself. "There's something else," he said. "The 4th company," I said. "I know. I didn't include it in the main report because I couldn't confirm the connection without." "No," he said. "Not that." I stopped. "I have a standing need," he said, "for someone to manage the financial documentation across 4 holding entities. The work requires precision, discretion, and a tolerance for finding things that other people would rather not find." I was very careful with my face. "I'm a bookkeeper," I said. "Yes," he said. "I know what you are. At an associate level," I said. "Because I report things. I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." Outside the windows, the city was doing what it always did, indifferent, loud, enormous. I thought about the B train, about packed lunches, about 7 years of accurate work filed under someone else's name. "I'd need to give the firm 4 weeks' notice," I said. Voss almost smiled, the corner of his mouth the same way as before. "4 weeks," he said, reasonable. He extended his hand. I shook it, and this time I didn't look away when I let go.